Hello and welcome. You're watching the Right to be Heard Townhall. We're just days away from the union budget and there are very serious concerns about the Indian economy slowing down and government inaction killing the vibrant India growth story. Joining us today is the Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. We've got some economists, we've got concerned citizens, students of economics, all set to grill the Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission. I want to ask the gentleman over there to ask the first question. So please go ahead.
So my question, sir, the best brains of the subject are in the government, sir. We have Pranab Mukherjee, we have Manmohan Singh, we have Chidambaram, we have you. But why the growth rate has come down from 8-9% to 5-6%, sir?
Well, that's a really good way of starting the discussion. It's true that the growth rate has come down, but I would just say that, I hope the viewers are aware that India is not the only country where the growth rate has come down. I mean, since about 2011, the whole global economy has slowed down massively. I'm not saying that our slowing down is only because of the global slowdown, but that clearly contributed something. So our view is that the global slowdown, and when I say global slowdown, it's really bad in the sense that Europe will have 0% growth. That would have contributed something. In addition, I think some domestic problems have arisen in the course of the last year or so, which have put impediments to investment, especially in infrastructure. And that's really what the government should be concentrating on. We can't do very much about the global slowdown. That will correct itself. Some people think that correction may be just about beginning now. But we can, and only we can, take care of our specific problems. And that's what we should do.
It would appear that Gujarat has managed to solve most of its problems with electricity generation. Would you hold up Narendra Modi as a role model to other chief ministers trying power sector reforms?
Well, as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, I'm kind of equally fond of all states. So we don't hold up individual states. But let me say that there's no doubt that there are 4 or 5 states that are doing very well. I think Gujarat is a well-performing state, no doubt about it. There's some states that are not doing very well. So actually, in whatever dimension you want to look at, there are some very, very good examples, and you'll find them spread across the states. Our view is we should certainly learn from what different states are doing. And I mean, if you look at power sector reform, for example, you mentioned specifically, probably the best performance in terms of power sector, in terms of reducing, let's say, transmission and distribution losses, is probably Andhra Pradesh. It's better than Gujarat. But, you have states which have transmission losses of 18%, and then you have states with transmission losses of over 50%.
But are you concerned, sir, if I combine the two questions, that an impression is going home at this time that the government isn't moving fast enough to push growth, and that in Gujarat people see development happening, they see growth happening at a very fast clip, and people wonder if Narendra Modi is the solution. As that gentleman said, there's so many wise people in the government, fabulous economists, who are not being able to push the India growth story, and they wonder if Modi is the solution.
Well, look, once again, I don't want to denigrate what any one chief minister is doing. I think if chief ministers are doing a good job, that's a good thing. The notion that economists push growth, this is a mistaken notion. I mean, many of the problems that we are now facing within the country are really problems that arise because of implementation difficulties with projects, in areas where there are forest clearances, environment clearances, land acquisition problems. They don't happen to be in Gujarat, but they are national problems, and I think the government has to address those.
Okay, let's get that gentleman to ask.
We have a Prime Minister who is a clean person, who is the epitome of honesty, and still there is no end to corruption scams which we have seen in this government, we have not seen earlier. And the worst thing is that government is just keeping its hands on the eyes like Mahatma Gandhi's monkey, and you say no corruption, there is nothing like that.
I don't think that's actually fair. I don't think the government has ever said that corruption is not a problem. Actually, governments over the last several years have recognized that the problem of corruption is there and we have to address it. I want to emphasize, by the way, that the problem of corruption is not just an Indian problem. And if you look at things like Transparency International and what have you, they do not rate us that much worse than many other countries that everybody admires.
We always come towards the bottom of the ranking.
No, I mean, if you're talking about a totally global thing, maybe we come lower down, not in the bottom. Actually, on those rankings, if you believe it or not, we've been improving. But let me not evade. It's not a debating issue. I want to make one very important point. See, I think there were many areas where there used to be corruption, and thanks to the economic reforms, that's all been cleaned up. I mean, in the old days, you could not import an item without getting a license. You couldn't start a project without getting an industrial license. This permission, that permission, all that's gone. What has happened is that there are certain areas where government permissions are still needed, and they've become associated with scams. Okay? Many of these cases are cases where the decisions were taken long ago, but the concerns have surfaced more recently. Let's just take two. One is telecom and the whole 2G issue. The second is allocation of coal mines. In both cases, the government will continue to do what was being done for the last 10 years, but the heightened awareness of issues made them controversial. What has the government done in response? In response, they've taken action. I mean, in the case of telecom, court proceedings are underway. But more importantly, they've changed the system. I mean, what used to be first come, first serve, which was started during the NDA regime and continued in the first part of the UPA regime, that has been changed now to auction of licenses, of spectrum. So there's a systemic change that has occurred. Now, obviously, if you keep looking at what happened in the past.
But why must there be corruption first?
No, but let me finish. The same thing is true of coal. Issues got raised, the government has changed the system. So in future, coal mines are being opened.
But that's the point he makes. Such an honest Prime Minister looking away, allowing for corruption to happen in the first place.
No, let me put it this way. Let me answer the question. If you want to answer the question, let me answer the question. So what I'm trying to say is, you said, what is the government doing? The government has responded to the problem, and in my view, that response is complete because it eliminates this problem for the future. Now your question that why do we have to wait?
No, but why allow for corruption to take place? The point of having wise people in government is that they realize the potential for corruption and they ensure that policy is formulated in a way that it doesn't allow corruption.
No.
You look at the plethora of issues on which there's been corruption. It's not just coal, it's not just 2G. There's a Manrega report. There's also the farm loan waiver scam. There is a scam almost, it seems, in every issue of economic policies.
This may be good television, but it's not good thinking. Whenever the government spends a lot of money, there is no system of government that is 100% efficient. So you will always find something somewhere where somebody hasn't followed the rules, something has gone wrong. That's not to say that you should ignore it. You should be watchful, newspapers should point it out, the system should correct itself. But to call everything a scam is just absurd.
Dr. Ahluwalia, the government often refers to the 1991 liberalization reforms, and we are still doing that. You just mentioned it. Isn't it time for the government to really move forward now and maybe do a bit of a rethink where the expenditure priorities are concerned and introduce some fresh thinking? Because at the end of the day, we are still talking about the same social sector schemes that were started, and yes, there is proven corruption happening in those schemes. You have power generation, you have infrastructure issues. So we are still talking about the same issues, and Rahul Gandhi mentioned the 1991 reforms. You just mentioned it. Isn't it time to look ahead?
No. By the way, it's always the time to look ahead. It's never a good idea to look back. I don't remember ever saying that the 1991 reforms is a reason for not questioning what we are doing. So if I said that, I would draw it. I was only saying that what I said was that before the 1991 reforms, every single decision for import permission or industrial permission, if the current standards are applied, every one of them would be called a scam. Because in those days, you accepted the fact that somebody went to the government, 3 or 4 secretaries sat down together, somebody said, I want to have an industrial project here. These fellows discussed something and said yes or no. Somebody said, I want to import something. 5 bureaucrats sat down and said yes or no. If you look at the minutes of those meetings, they're completely non-transparent. So the reason I referred to that is to say that it's completely wrong to say that the government has done nothing about corruption. I think it would be foolish to deny that new problems have arisen. And I tell you why. I mean, look, the whole environment issue, land clearance, in the old days, you didn't have private sector involvement in infrastructure. So it was some public sector company that bought the land, some public sector company that got the environment clearance. There's no evidence, by the way, that they did a good job environmentally, but nobody questioned. Today, if you're opening it up to the private sector, and you should open it up because they have a lot of money, otherwise we'd be spending the money. The fact that this is private sector makes everybody ask questions. Why did you give them forest clearance? Why did you give land acquisition? Why did you give environment clearance? This is good in my view, by the way. The fact that these are private sector companies, we should subject them to tighter scrutiny. But let us evolve systems that we trust.
No, but the question that she's asking,
whatever system there is, immediately somebody questions
that. But the question that's being asked is about the next big idea. 1991 was a big idea. The current team was there. People are still talking about 1991. This is 2013.
No, I'm sorry.
Where is the next big idea?
That is not true.
Now we're just tinkering and tweaking what happened in 1991.
Yes, we have just finished the 12th five-year plan. Okay, that's been approved by the cabinet. It's approved by the National Development Council. The 12th five-year plan takes for granted 1991. It asks the question, what are the challenges now? And what it says very clearly is that we're not only talking about growth. Mind you, in 1991, maybe there was a concern about growth because we weren't growing that rapidly. Today, it's believed that we know how to grow rapidly. The concern is the growth inclusive? So the whole focus is on inclusive growth. That's not a 1991 idea. That's a contemporary idea.
By taxing the rich, we may send a signal that we are taxing the rich and sparing the poor, protecting the poor. But will it be proper that if we don't have the political courage to tax the rural rich?
The farmers, the rich farmers, why don't they ever get taxed?
Before you start taxing farmers, let's stop subsidizing them. So in my view, if you're serious about bringing in an element of distributional equity, I think many of the subsidies that are currently being given ostensibly for agriculture are actually going only to big farmers. I don't think people are aware of the fact that probably the subsidy which the states give by giving away power either free or very, very cheap probably come to something of the order of 30,000-40,000 crores. And the subsidy on fertilizer is something of the order of 80,000 crores. Now, you know, in my view, well before you start doing the taxing, you should get rid of some of these subsidies. They're actually harmful, many of them. You're also not charging anything for water in agriculture. It's a politically very sensitive issue. These are not issues that the central government has to decide. These are issues the state governments. I think part of the problem with economic policy, we're all in favor of a federal system. We're all in favor of greater independence to the states. But all our criticisms of economic policy are directed at the center.
So continuing with the same, as students of economics, Mills has always told us, nurse the baby, protect the child and free the adult. When are we going to free our farmers and agricultural sector, or for that matter any of these protections, so that we really grow up, India grow up economically?
No, I fully agree with you that any socially just system would give a lot of attention to ensuring that the population is well fed and healthy, and also in particular that children get their fair share. There are many things that we're doing in order to achieve that. I mean, the most important, by the way, is that we must increase agricultural production and agricultural productivity. I don't believe if you neglect agricultural productivity, that by various government schemes you can end up finding a population that's well fed. Now, the record on that is pretty good, because if you look at the 11th plan, which ended last year, the growth rate of agriculture in the 10th plan was 2.4% per year. The 11th plan is 3.7% per year. If you look at what's happening in rural consumption, the growth rate of rural consumption in the more recent period is about 4 times higher than it was in the previous period. So I believe that quite a lot of this is happening. There are many government schemes also, midday meal scheme, ICDS, of course the food security, a new bill will come that gives a certain amount of assured access to food.
So the government and the Planning Commission is coming out with various schemes for the welfare of the people, for which they are increasing the various kinds of taxes, but it is not planning how the quality of expenditure, how the delivery mechanism needs to be improved. I don't think the Planning Commission, the government, has looked much into it. And I think if they look into this, the burden for increasing the taxes will go down sharply. So simultaneously, when you come out with the schemes, you must have checks and balances which ensure the quality of spending and which ensure that the quality of delivery gets improved.
I cannot disagree with the view that we tend to focus too much on the level of expenditure and not enough on how to make it more effective. Planning Commission, by the way, is constantly saying that we should look at the effectiveness of planned expenditure, and we have found many ways where we are focusing on that. Today, I would say that that is very much the focus of discussion. I mean, in the sense, you look at health or look at education. We want to roll out a much bigger public sector education system, which we should. We've done that. You've got near universal enrollment on the part of younger children, which is good. You've got midday meal schemes, so they're staying in school. But if you start asking yourself, what is the quality of education they're getting, that doesn't seem to be very good, according to Pratham. I mean, Pratham does all these surveys year after year, and their surveys show that, in the last 5 or 6 years, if you go to a class 5 group of children and ask them how many of them can read a paragraph which should be read by class 2, 50% of them can't do it. So there's a problem. But merely saying there's a problem doesn't solve the problem. We have to find out how to do it. I don't think that's something the Planning Commission or even the ministry can do. Most of these schemes are implemented at the state government level, and we need involvement of parent-teacher associations, local governments, state governments, educationists, civil society, a whole lot of people asking the question, why is this money not being well spent?
But that's always...
I don't think you can do it by a simple direction from the center.
The checks and balances should be part of that scheme. So this is my suggestion that, when you design the scheme, you design the plan, the checks and balances should be part of that scheme, because that will ensure quality spending and it will ensure that the money reaches the people for which it is intended.
Well, I don't disagree that we ought to do better there. It's not so easy, by the way, to put in a check and... What is the check and balance? In the sense that if we want to start a primary school and we don't recruit the teacher, the state government recruits the teacher, and the teacher is constantly absent or not absent but doesn't teach, what is the check that you want? It's not very clear.
Like in a village, you form a committee, retired defense personnel, retired teacher, some panchayat members, so that they have a system.
You go and you will find in every village they have formed a village health and education committee. But the truth is that it will take a long time before panchayats feel sufficiently empowered and that these systems begin to work.
Lots of people anxious to ask questions. Please go ahead.
Sir, given the fact that the government has been unable to bring a broad consensus on the FDI in multi-brand retail, sir, don't you think the policy is very fragile? Because if tomorrow the BJP comes to power, suppose in Delhi, if Tesco has invested, so where will Tesco go? So the investors' confidence is already been compromised because there has not been a broad consensus. There may be clashes within the governments. The BJP people may run down the shops by Walmart. So
that's a very good question. It's a very genuine concern.
Well, all I can say is that as far as policy is concerned, the policy is selective. It says that as and when state governments allow it, it's going to be allowed. Some states have allowed it, others have not.
No, but even in the states that have allowed it, that permission is meaningless because no one knows 8, 10, 12 months down, if the government were to change and a new party were to get elected, all these investors could be forced to shut shop.
Well, it's always the case in a democracy that when you have an opposition party making statements, it is up to its own sense of responsibility what statements it makes. And after all, in a parliamentary democracy, they are free to make whatever statements they like. We have to see whether Parliament will behave in a particular way or not. Most foreign investors are aware that, they take their chances as to how political parties will behave. We'll have to see what they do. I personally think it will be disastrous
So, hello sir, I'm from the Young India Fellowship Program, and my question pertains to the fact that given the credibility or the lack of it in the recent Euro crisis for these rating agencies, how much of the finance ministry is pandering towards them in the wake of the impending India's credit downgrade really justifiable or sustainable?
I don't like the use of the term pandering, and I don't know whether the finance ministry was pandering to them or not. I don't think we've. You cannot sort of say that what we are doing, at least I wouldn't say, that what we are doing to control the fiscal deficit is because of the rating agencies.
But isn't it true that everybody's so concerned about what the rating agencies would say, and that really gets all the technocrats into a tizzy?
No, I'm not saying that we are saying this only because of the rating agency. The truth of the matter is that virtually every independent financial analyst recognizes that the fiscal deficit is one of the critical parameters of fiscal health or economic health. And India has the highest fiscal deficit of any emerging market country. It's also not true that our debt ratio is all that low compared to other emerging market countries. So frankly, I think it would be foolish for us to ignore the fact that most people looking at emerging markets, looking at other markets, would regard India's fiscal deficit and also India's current account deficit at the moment as a weak spot. Now, if you think it's a weak spot, you need to address it. Now, obviously, the rating agencies are looking at the same thing. Just because they say that, they also look at it, it would be a bit silly for us to say, no, we are not pandering to them. You should ask yourself, what is good health? And I think there's a pretty good reason for worrying about fiscal deficit objectively, nothing to do with the rating agency.
You just mentioned that there's fiscal deficit in the country. Then why are you not implementing the voluntary disclosure of income scheme? Because it will help to correct the fiscal deficit.
Well, once again, these are issues in the hands of the finance minister. But when you say voluntary disclosure, we have in the past had odd voluntary disclosure schemes. They have not, by the way, been hugely successful. And many thoughtful tax people also make the point that voluntary disclosure schemes are a bad idea because they create an atmosphere in which you can keep avoiding taxes and just wait for the next voluntary disclosure scheme. So frankly, I think the notion that voluntary disclosure is a way of fixing the fiscal deficit is grossly exaggerated.
But so the fact is the government's made so much noise about black money, but during the entire tenure of UPA, not 1 rupee of this so-called black money has been brought back to the country.
Well, I don't know whether the government, the sort of public debate about black money existing.
No, the government's made so many promises on the floor of the House and elsewhere.
No,
we're very committed, we're doing what we can. Not 1 rupee of black money has come back to India.
What you do in these cases is when you get evidence, and we've had certain cases where there's evidence that some people have maybe some illegal accounts, illegal money, you can just pursue them, that's all.
I feel there is no coordination between ministries of government. Sometime back, government appointed UID chairman, and it was under your planning commission. And the government said that UID cards will be made for the people. There's some thousands of rupees have been spent, allocated, and now this year also is going on. Simultaneously, Home Ministry was updating their national population register. They said Aadhaar is not required. Now Aadhaar has been made more than many crore people. Money has been spent. Now they are asking us to make NPR, these cards, which is known as smart cards. Government is spending on voter ID card. Government is spending on UID. Government is spending on NPR. So why this?
Why did it take so long to realize that there would be an inherent clash?
There is no coordination.
There isn't actually an inherent clash. You could say that there's an element of duplication. The clash has long been sorted out. I mean, the UID is a very important initiative. The old voter identity didn't have a unique ID card.
He's asking about the population register.
Yeah, but my point is the population register is a statutory requirement under some law that was passed.
Shouldn't there just be one card, sir? You carry around 3 cards looking for each one of them.
Aadhaar is not a card. The Aadhaar is only a unique ID number which is in the database linked to a biometric method of identification. The National Population Register has what is called a multi-something card. And on that card will be the Aadhaar number.
No, but why should there be this
Money is
duplication?
being spent.
But
Why
there's
should
no-
money be spent on
Let
both?
me say there's no duplication in the sense that
You just said that there is duplication.
no, there is a possibility of duplication, but that has been resolved because the number that's going to be used in the ID card is the Aadhaar number. That's the difference. Now, the card is a totally different thing. I mean, the card is statutorily needed. It's compulsory for you to have it. It's not necessary for you to have the Aadhaar if you don't want any government benefits. It's a totally different scheme.
But you do realize that no one's really convinced of that argument because you've got two schemes working parallel to each other, money being spent on both when it should actually have been merged into one
could
mega
have been spent
project.
somewhere
And the
else.
government should have thought that through before beginning on Aadhaar.
Let me try to explain what I'm saying. The Aadhaar system does not depend on people having a card. You're not given a card or a smart card or whatever. It is from the Home Ministry side that the National Population Register, in a separate law that was passed, said that there should also be a card. Now that's part of the law. The law was brought in at the time of the NDA government. So that is governed by a law. All that has now happened to avoid duplication is that the Aadhaar number is the number that will be implanted in the card.
Okay.
Now, I have no comment whatsoever on the card. We are just interested in the number.
I'm a faculty of computer, and your reply regarding UID is a misleading.
Oh, really?
Because in UID you are only adding biometric and code, individual code of an individual person. The remaining data you are taking from the card, which is already available on the voter ID cards. So there are duplication of efforts by different agencies. So there are unnecessary money is being expended on so many agencies, whether belong to home ministry or ex-ministry or Y ministry. They should have converged at one point, as it should have been at an efficiency also at the implementation level also. It has not been very active, I'm showing successful result also. So and I've been hearing also otherwise also. People say the planning commission is basically a white elephant. They evolve the policy. They can't ensure that it will be implemented successfully at the lowest level, and they accuse, like I said, to the state government or different machineries. So if they cannot evolve a policy which they can ensure it will be implemented at the last level of the human being, then it is useless to have a planning commission body like this, and it is a very expensive exercise. Now in 12th plan, your focus area is a skill development center issue. Now we know recently Manmohan Singh addressed all this vice chancellor conference and said not a single university is under the 200 university of the world, global things. We have this scenario of the universities, central universities, and we are going to the skill development. And tomorrow, after the skill development policies, we are not been able to employ them after getting these skills. Then who will be accountable? Whether planning commission, state government, or it is going to be all other policies like that?
Well, one thing I want, if you're going to say that the planning commission should be made responsible for implementation, I don't think you'll find any support for that anywhere in government, central government or state government. Because they would say that, look here, your job is to articulate the overall policy, discuss with people, let us do the implementing. We're the ones that will tell you what is working, what is not working. I don't think anyone wants the planning commission to be doing implementation. We're not an implementing body. Now, having said that, it's also not much use to say that nothing is happening. I mean, I question the proposition. I know it's a very easy proposition. Look, except for this year, until last year, I mean, we had a run of 7 years or whatever it is of 8% growth. Something was happening. So quite honestly, the glass is never completely full. The question is it almost empty? Is it half full? Is it nearly full? And it varies, depends on what you're looking at. So I just do not accept the proposition that nothing is happening.
Dr. Ahluwalia, there's you've been talking about the importance of employment generation, but there's rather damning data that says that labor force participation has remained stagnant from 2004 to 2009, and an ILO report suggests that participation of women has also dropped, and you're spending money on skill development. So how does it all add up? It's quite worrying.
It's true that the growth of employment, the absolute growth of employment, has been less than in the previous period. If you want to criticize the government, you would focus on that. But it's also true that the growth of labor force participation has been much slower. So actually, although employment grew more slowly, unemployment has actually gone down. One of the reasons is people are getting educated, and particularly women are getting educated. So people are not going into the labor force because they're getting educated. That's a good thing. I would say on the employment front, the disappointing news is that we're not producing enough high quality jobs to meet the requirements of the newly educated young population. That is true. And I think we need to address that problem.
Sir, my question is, some days ago there was a comment by Mr. Narendra Modi saying that it is not the business of the government to be in business. It basically means he's more of a person who believes in privatization, sir. Now, are you people also following suit? And if it is so, then you are actually creating a system in which the government and the planning commission becomes more irrelevant, because the private players as such don't like a parallel economic setup. What do you have to say about that?
Let me say that I haven't actually seen exactly what Narendra Modi said, but I can well believe what you say. That's not a very different from what we are saying. We ourselves are saying that in a modern economy, government is not meant to be in business. I mean, government is meant to create a facilitating environment that will allow the economy to develop. The job of the Planning Commission is not connected with whether government is in business. The job of the Planning Commission is to identify what are the challenges before us for the next 10 years or next 20 years. And you need a Planning Commission to have a successful private sector-led growth process.
We talked about moving forward. We talked about, execution. I have a question here. A lot of our economic parameters like the BPL thresholds, the tax parameters, for example, exemptions are just about 800 rupees, which doesn't get us anywhere close to, it's just one trip in a month maybe. So some of these systems are still very, very archaic. I mean, you as the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, are we doing anything to revisit, review some of these key parameters that, still hold very strong in our systems?
So what kind of parameter do you have in mind?
Below poverty line, I think it's 20.
We are, there was a poverty line recommended by Tendulkar, and a lot of people felt that, it's too low. This is an arbitrary thing, and I have no quarrel with saying, you can set a higher poverty line if you like. And we've set up a committee under Rangarajan. He's looking at what Tendulkar recommended 5 years ago, and he's going to submit a report later this year. And I mean, I'm sure it'll be a very good report, and we look at that. That's not a problem. I think the confusion on poverty line, it's quite reasonable, by the way, to say that this is the poverty line we've always used. We've updated it from time to time. The country's now become richer. We have higher income levels. Let's raise the poverty line. Perfectly reasonable. There are some countries that say that the poverty line is whatever line cuts off 30% of the population. That's a line that would rise every year. I have no problem with that. The confusion really arose because many people felt that if the food subsidy is given only to those below the poverty line, then over time, the numbers below the percentages below the poverty line have gone down. And they were not happy that if you use the old poverty line, only 22% of the people are below the poverty line, and many food security activists wanted a larger percentage. To my mind, the purpose of having a poverty line is to decide on some level and say, well, look, as a result of growth, the percentage below this level, which is X now, will become half X in 10 years. They are two completely separate things. So I don't think the poverty line parameter is not very crucial. Okay. What is crucial is who's going to get the benefits.
Senior citizens, almost of my age, have been paying tax.
My age too, by the way.
Okay. I am 80 plus 83 years old.
Okay, so you're senior to me, that's
Thank
for
you.
sure.
Thank you. So what I find is, they have been paying tax for the past 50 to 60 years. And in the evening of their life, I find they have hardly any facility for hospitalization or anything of that sort.
We have recognized that the category of senior citizens does require special attention. remember when as longevity increases, and if people are lucky, more and more of them will reach your age. That's an achievement in itself. I certainly hope that I'll be lucky enough to get there. But I think as people become older, they do need some support, especially since the family support structure is likely to erode. Not that children don't love their parents as much, but they're going to be living in different places. So I think senior citizens need more support. Now, we have done one thing, and that is that the tax slab of exemption, I think goes up to even 90. So I think when you reach the age of 90, which I hope you do, you'll find that you get a little bit of an extra tax burden. What I think we don't have, and that is a serious problem, is that health insurance beyond, I forget, age 75, our health insurance companies do not continue ahead. This is, in my view, completely wrong. And I think now the problem is they will not take on older people, so that transition we have to manage. Of course, theoretically, universal health is applicable to senior citizens also, but what is not available to them, unless you happen to be a government employee, in which case the CGHS is available, a private employee cannot actually buy health insurance.
So why don't you do something to change that?
I fully agree with you, and in my view, that should be a very high priority. Healthcare costs go up. It will mean premiums will rise, and they should rise, because every one of us, will be ending up paying for the health problems that those of us who are lucky enough to live that long may have. And it's not a free good, but you spread it across the entire insured population. I think the reason it hasn't happened is that, first of all, most people, when they buy insurance, think, oh well, I'm covered until 75. They kind of ignore that. That's one point. And I think that's a mistake, because insurance should.
So you're insured till when?
What?
You're insured till when?
Well, I happen to be a government employee, so the CGHS, I have no idea. I hope the CGHS gives me quality care when I'm not in government. But technically, I'm covered, and that's why I've not had that. But I do believe that a private citizen, starting at some age, should be able to buy an insurance which will remain valid throughout his life, although at different points you could allow some increase in the premium. This is a big institutional issue, and I think we do need to address that. I agree with you.
The gentleman there.
So the 12th five-year plan projects about $1 trillion worth of investment in infrastructure development, and you have at times suggested that the forex reserves of the country, in one way or the other, may be used for infrastructure development. Given the current account deficit, what are your views on that?
Well, I think I suggested that, by the way, in the year 2005. When the foreign exchange reserves were above 300 billion and the current account was practically in balance. So the external situation has changed quite dramatically. Right now, I would not argue that our foreign exchange reserves are still about 300 billion, although the size of the overall trade has doubled and the current account deficit has widened. So I don't think that's any more relevant. It was relevant then, and we did something. We did have some convoluted way in which the India Infrastructure Finance Company Limited raised money abroad, and the RBI contributed to that. So something was done.
Okay, Dr. Ahluwalia, we're out of time on this program. You've taken on direct questions, you've given answers, the voice of the people has been heard. Joining us in the Right to be Heard Town Hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you.